We are in Palace 3 right now, and we're going to be listening to Matthew Prince deliver a talk on lessons from surviving a 300 gigabyte denial of service attack. Matthew?
Thank you. My name is Matthew Prince. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Cloudflare. I don't think that I will be as interesting as the director of the NSA, but I'll try to hopefully be a little less controversial. I am actually a privacy law professor, so I have read the Constitution. So, and while I can't actually discuss it at great length, someday hopefully I can tell you the story of the lawsuits that we have currently going on against the United States government to challenge some of what's going on, because it's absolutely bullshit. So this is a less interesting story, but it was a dramatic story in its own right. It's a story of between March 18th and March 25th when one of our customers came under attack. I'm going to talk a lot, not very much about Cloudflare. If you want to know about Cloudflare, go to our website. But one of our customers came under an attack during this time, and the attack got to a level that journalists thought it was interesting to write about. Most of the stuff that people in this room, you have a hard time getting any attention from anyone. The fact that we got written up for 4 straight days in the New York Times about this attack was actually overkill in the other direction. But it was a big attack, and I wanted to tell you about it. So what's pretty neat is the organization behind it is this nonprofit called Spamhaus. I've known the Spamhaus guys for a really long time, back in 2006, 2007, when they were sued by a alleged spammer in Illinois. Steve Linford called me and asked if I would serve as their pro bono counsel. I said earlier that I was a privacy lawyer. That means I teach a class, right? So I'd never actually appeared in court, so I was very quickly found them real counsel, but for a short amount of time helped them get through a sticky situation. So I knew about that. And what's really neat about Spamhaus is that they're a pretty open organization. A lot of the organizations we deal with and our customers are everything from tiny individual blogs to Fortune 500 companies to national governments. Most of them don't like us talking about when they come to attack. The Spamhaus guys were cool, and they said, hey, you can tell the story. And so this is the story of the Spamhaus attack and exactly what we saw behind the scenes when it went down. And so I'm going to break the story up into 3 parts. The first is the attack itself, who is behind it to some extent, although if you really want to get the backstory of that, come to my talk at DEF CON next week where it's going to be a little more interesting, but less technical. Second, what did we do to stop it? How did we design our network to stop it? And this is not a story of great intelligence or incredible software. This is really a story of smart network design. And then the last piece is, what can you do in your own networks to stop it? And I promise that the answer at no point is going to be use Cloudflare. Instead, here are the things that we would just suggest as good practices that everyone should be doing across their network in order to make it so that you're less vulnerable to these types of attacks, because more and more of these attacks are coming. So, the attack. On Monday, March 18th, we got a call from one of the Spamhaus volunteers. This is what their website looked like. At the time, it had been knocked offline by an attacker. The story of the attacker has been told to some extent. What the media has reported was that it was a guy named Sven who was living in a bunker somewhere in the Netherlands, launching these attacks. He probably wasn't the actual master. Maybe didn't gather this from the fact that he was willing to talk to the New York Times. Probably wasn't the real mastermind behind this. The real mastermind is more likely a kid, 15-year-old kid based in London, who's also under arrest now. But not as much noise has been made about it. But they launched an attack. They had some beefs to pick with Spamhaus. We occasionally have beefs to pick with Spamhaus with the listings that they do. Again, this organization does a lot of good, but occasionally steps on some people's toes. And when they do, people do a lot of different things, and in this case, they launched an attack against them. They're pretty technically savvy, so they're able to sort of defeat a lot of the attacks, but in this case, while it wasn't knocking offline their core DNS infrastructure, which is massively multi-homed and anycasted and done a lot of things to keep it online, it was knocking off their website, and this is embarrassing for any organization. And so they wanted this to stop. They knew that we helped stop things like this, so they gave us a call. And from March 18th to March 21st, I would say that we had what we would call annoyance attacks. These are attacks that are kind of bread and butter for us. We get several of these a week. To give you a sense, attacks in this scale we had 162 of launched against customers behind our network last week. And we're pretty good at stopping this level of attack. That's from the 10 to kind of the 80 gigabit per second denial of service attack. To give you some scale though, some of those are kind of big attacks. The attacks that felled the US financial institution last year got up to sort of the 60, 70, 80 gigabit range. And so seeing these is big, but they are largely things that were kind of bread and butter and nothing that would be, worthy of a black hat briefing. One other thing to note is that attacks aren't all the same. Like everyone writes about the volume of attacks, and this particular attack that we're going to talk about today is sort of what we call a layer 3 attack, which is just a pure volume-based attack. But those aren't always the nastiest attacks that are out there. A lot of the layer 7 attacks that are out there don't generate nearly as much volume, but they cause a lot more problems to the actual application. Not going to talk about that today as much. That needs real special, interesting software and things in order to stop those types of attacks. Same thing with layer 4 attacks that are sending a whole bunch of SYN packets. Actually, small volume can do a lot of damage if your underlying operating system doesn't deal with those requests particularly well. In this case, though, this is a purely volume-based attack. It's trying to kill you at layer 3. It's trying to just knock you off the web and saturate your port. And so this was Wednesday, March 20th. This is one of the ports on our network. It's actually a conglomeration of ports. Spamhaus was sitting behind. You can see we're a caching proxy. So the blue line is egress traffic. That's traffic going out from our network. The green line is ingress traffic. That's traffic coming into our network. The big green blob at the end, that's an attack. Right? And that was an attack directed almost entirely at Spamhaus and hit our network. And that was about a 75 gigabit per second attack. And no big deal, right? Because of the way our network is designed, we can just absorb attacks like that. And we'll talk about how we do that in the future. There's always kind of been a magic 100 gigabit per second ceiling in most denial of service attacks that have been out there. And the reason why is pretty simple, that if you're buying or building a core router, you're getting it from someone like Cisco or Juniper, the biggest, baddest box that you can buy has a 100 gig port. And while you could theoretically aggregate together multiple 100 gig ports to do more theoretical capacity across that same interface, that kind of has been the ceiling, the natural ceiling to the size of denial of service attacks. And you can look at Arbor's data or our data or just about anyone's data, and that's kind of where everything hovered around for quite some time. And so when Tom, who's one of our network engineers, called me and said, hey, the attack got bigger. Because again, it was kind of bumping up against that natural ceiling. I thought, oh, it'll be just a little bit bigger. What happened instead is that it peaked at substantially larger scale. So you can see that starting on March 24th, this is UTC time. So it was actually, I live in San Francisco, and you can just imagine what my dinner was like on March 23rd. I was getting calls frantically like, it's over 100, right? Which was sort of, we're not sure if this is, we haven't seen something like this, so it's different. And then all of a sudden, like 4 calls came in simultaneously. That's from one of our upstream network providers, and several of our network engineers that said, now we've got over 300 gigabits of traffic that's hitting the edge of our network. And you can see it kind of bounced back and forth from March 24th to March 25th, peaking at the absolute highest time at about 309 gigabits per second. That's what was recorded at the edge of one of our upstream providers. So there may have actually been more traffic than that. We don't have the data for it. So the question is how? Like if 100 gigs is the ceiling to these things, how did this kid in London, this 15-year-old kid in London, how did they launch what was, a heretofore unprecedented level of attack? And a lot of people, and again, media has actually reported on this wrong. A lot of people have said, you need a botnet. In this case, actually, there was really, until the very end where they sort of just started throwing the kitchen sink at us, there was almost no botnet traffic that was involved in this, and there was no true botnet that had to be involved. The other is, oh, it's anonymous. You've got to launch this. Lots and lots of people, and they're coordinated, and they're working together to launch some sort of an attack like that. Gosh, that's the scariest attacks that are out there. Not at all. This, in fact, was probably 3, maybe 4 individuals, one of whom was the real technical mastermind behind it. Very limited in terms of resources, in terms of people that were out there. And the last is that you need significant technical skill. And I've seen the code that actually generated the attack. And it's about 50 lines of C, not including the headers that get included. It's just not a ton of information what's there. And I'm actually going to show you in a second exactly how you can launch one of these attacks as well. Instead, it's kind of like DEF CON. So here's what you need instead. And there's been a lot of talk about this, but I want to make it really concrete. So the first thing that you need is a list of what are called open DNS resolvers. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is. And the second is you need some servers, preferably machines with quite a bit of capacity, running on some network that allows IP address spoofing. Those are the ingredients for an attack like this. And if you have those two things, and it turns out if you have even just a tiny fraction, tiny number of those two things, then you can launch very, very large attacks. And nothing has changed since this attack, which is making it that much harder for attacks like this to exist, which is a little spooky. So let's talk about open DNS resolvers first. So DNS is sort of the little white pages for the internet. DNS is a system of caching caches that exists across the internet, able to answer queries that are sent to it. A misconfigured DNS resolver, or what's known as an open DNS resolver, is one that answers queries no matter who asks them. It is effectively like a slutty DNS resolver. Anyone asks, the DNS query is going to give it a response back to it, no matter who it is, right? And it's running without any limits on, so it doesn't have limits on how many requests you can send to it. It doesn't have limits on who those requests can come from. And so people ask, well, is Google running an open resolver because they run the Google DNS project? Or what about David Yulovich running open DNS? Is that an open DNS resolver? Despite being called open DNS, Google and OpenDNS and these types of organizations do a lot to actually rate limit the number of requests that can be sent to their resolvers, and they then make it very hard for you to launch an attack like this. They also do some things to limit the size of the responses that they give back. And there's been some work recently, in fact just announced last week out of ISC, the folks behind Bind, that have new extensions to Bind that allow Bind to actually have rate limiting which is in place, which is something that has been sorely missing for quite some time. Because the version of this talk that comes out next year doesn't talk about the resolvers, but it talks about authoritative name servers and how they're starting to be used to attack customers. And that's actually really scary when that happens. So how exactly does this work? Well, the purpose of using these, the purpose of any attack, right, whether you're using a botnet or you're doing whatever, is to say, I have very few resources and I'm going to leverage them to create more resources. There's a talk at Black Hat to talk about how DDoS is perfect asymmetrical warfare because a very small person can create an enormous large amount of harm. And open DNS resolvers do this in an extremely explicit way. So let me walk you through exactly how it is. So if anyone has a terminal window open, this is the key command that you can run in order to launch an attack. As of last night at 2 in the morning, which is the last time I checked, 63.217.84.76 is an open DNS resolver running on PCCW's network. Right? And if you send it this query, it will correctly respond. There are a couple of flags. So dig is just a DNS query. It's like an NS lookup if you're from the Windows world. Any means return any record that you can find as a result of this. So generate as much as you can. ISC.org, they're the bind guys. So they want to show you every type of DNS record which is possible. So their DNS file is huge. That's an open resolver. So the query is querying that resolver. eDNS equals 0 is a flag which says give me back everything including DNSSEC and a lot of the other types of flags that you might not get by default. Not TCP is a pretty critical flag in this type of attack. That forces the DNS resolver to not use TCP to negotiate the transaction but send it all over UDP. And then buffer size equals 4096. Says make those UDP buffers as big as you can, so send me beefy packets back. So you run this nice one little response. That's a 64-byte query. And here's what you get back. So that's over 3,000 bytes of response, right? And so if you can find an open DNS resolver, you can send up 63 bytes and you can get back more than 3,000 bytes. Right? Which is to say that you took a very small amount of resources and you made it into a very big problem. 50x amplification factor, the attacks that we saw got really close to that. They designed their queries pretty well. They were in the 47x range in terms of the amplification that they were getting. They were querying mostly against either RIPE or ISC. There's nothing ISC or RIPE can really do because they're seeing requests from all of these different resolvers, and the resolvers cache the response. One of the really amusing, well, I'll tell you that in a second, but so the challenge is that amplification doesn't work by default. If I send the tiny little query up and I get a big response back, I've effectively DDoSed myself. And so if you do this in your terminal window, that's exactly what you're doing. And so the other ingredient, which is necessary in order to launch these attacks, is that you need a network that allows source IP address spoofing, right? So what source IP address spoofing is it says, I'm going to pretend that a packet is being originated from an IP address, which it's not actually being originated from. I'm going to send that to the DNS resolver. Since UDP is a fire and forget protocol, there's no handshake, it just receives that and it goes, okay, I need to send a response, and it responds back answering that to what it thinks of as the source. Now, good networks don't allow this to happen. Good networks say, at your edge, when a packet is egressing your network, if that packet has a source that you are not responsible for within your network, then don't forward it on, right? And this is known as BCP, or Best Common Practice 38, and it's implemented across most eyeball networks that are out there, although as we'll see, across a shameful few number of other networks, and there are a lot of networks that are responsible for this. So if you have these two ingredients, because you have UDP, you don't have to have a handshake. If you can generate a spoof source address, then what you can do is you can say, I'm going to spoof the source address, and that's again one of the IP addresses that Cloudflare hands out for Spamhaus. You can give this particular DNS query and make sure that it's done over UDP so that there is no handshake. And then the response from all of these open DNS resolvers around the world gets sent back to our network, or to whoever the target's network is. The really annoying kind of secondary DDoS that these attacks cause is to your customer service team. If you're a customer, which is if you're under attack by one of these things, because what happens is, of the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of open DNS resolvers that are around there, from their perspective, what they see is an attack on their DNS infrastructure. They see this rogue network, this 190.93.243.93, sending tons of packets to hit their infrastructure. And they send the most indignant, angry, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know how to run a network, you've got compromised machines, how dare you attack me? And you have to very politely explain, actually you're attacking us. Because that's what's happening. Because they haven't properly configured their DNS resolver, those responses are getting bounced back and they're affecting us. And so that's an opportunity to teach people to clean their networks up. And those are good things when they actually happen. By and large, though, people just don't even notice, and these attacks get amplified and they get launched against the significance. This is, if anyone's familiar, if anyone's been around doing this long enough, these are like the old Smurf attacks where you use the broadcast port on a router to send ICMP, ping requests, spoofing the source, and then getting all of the devices behind to respond back to one thing. Well, the good thing in that case was the routing industry cleaned that problem up fairly effectively, and you see those every once in a while now, but it's hard to launch one of these attacks. On the other hand, these DNS reflection attacks are just scary easy to launch. So, how common are these particular ingredients running on the internet? Well, this is the Open Resolver project, which was, this is a pretty revolutionary product. This is something that a lot of people in this room debated for a long time whether or not someone should launch this. This is a list of all of the open resolvers that are running on the internet. And it's published out there, and the problem is that just like it can be used by good guys to tell whether you have a misconfigured network, bad guys can potentially use it too in order to get the list. It is not a coincidence that this was launched Monday after what we internally in the office refer to as the weekend of hell. At that point, a lot of the tier 1 providers, the big network providers, said this problem has gotten significant enough that it's clear the bad guys do have the list. And so we need to start cleaning the list up. So the good news is you can go to openresolverproject.org, you can type in your AS number or your IP range, and you can see whether you've got open resolvers running on your network. So if PCCW did this, they could see it, they can clean it up, that's being part of the problem and the solution. We got all this press around this attack, we really promoted the Open Resolver project. Today, there are 28 million open resolvers. I'd love to tell you that it used to be 30 or 40 or 50. The sad news is that when the Open Resolver project launched immediately after the attack, there were only 21 million. So we're going the wrong direction. The second is that an enormous percentage of the internet's networks allow spoofing. This is a project out of MIT that tracks spoofable networks. This is a little bit harder to test remotely. But their tests show that almost 25% of the internet allows spoofing. There is no excuse in 2013 for you to not have implemented BCP38 at your edge routers. You should not be allowing packets that originate inside your network to come from IP addresses that you're not responsible for. It does not increase the load on your routers in any significant way. Any router that's been built since 2002 can support it with a simple toggle. It's just laziness if you're not supporting it. Good news is that largely the networks that big botnets are running on don't support this. So the eyeball networks of the world are largely closed off from BCP38. The disaster scenario would be if, someday one of the big networks, if China Telecom or someone turned up something that allowed the spoofing, because then you could use a botnet to generate the traffic to the DNS servers to generate an enormous potential attack. So this is probably the easiest place for the people in this room to make a difference. It's going to be hard for us to clean up all the world's open resolvers, but you all have the power to implement on your networks the ability to make sure that you're doing the right thing and not transiting packets that aren't destined for your network. So that's sort of the universe of ingredients to launch attacks like this. Let's look specifically at the Spamhaus attacks, and let's look at two specific incidents. So the first was on March 24th. This was the attack that got up to about 309 gigs for about 28 minutes. Of that, the panicked phone call from Tom called me and he said, so it got up over 300 gigs. And I said, is the network up? And he's like, yeah, we're okay. Network's up. You can still reach Spamhaus. You can still reach all of our other customers. We're seeing a little bit of packet loss in some places, which is adding latency, but network's holding together. And I said, then why do you seem so scared? And he said, because they're only using 0.1% of the world's open resolvers. And if they start using 1%, and it's not a 300 gig attack, but a 3 terabit attack, or if they start using 10%, and it's not a 3 terabit attack, but a 30 terabit attack. I think today we could stand up to a 3 terabit attack. We couldn't have in March. We can't beat a 30 terabit attack, and I don't know anyone around who can. And so that's a real challenge for the network. The other thing which was surprising, and this is data that I'm less sure about, this is gathered by talking with a bunch of the tier 1 providers that were monitoring the network and looking at where sources of packets come from. As far as we can tell, there were only 3 networks that were used for the spoofing addresses, and it looks like there were between 5 and 7 compromised, pretty beefy servers running on those 3 networks. One was in San Jose, the other was in Minnesota, and the third was in Germany. And those were the 3 networks. So relatively modest resources led to a relatively large attack. Another peak showed similar characteristics. So on the 25th, got up over 72 minutes. Not that many more open resolvers. Same networks being used. Same types of attack pattern which was coming across that. So again, relatively modest resources. Or, the equation for this is pretty simple, which is one attacker with one laptop, as far as we can tell, and we have screenshots which I can show you at DEF CON, with 5 to 7 compromised servers, 3 networks generating about 9 gigabits of DNS traffic sent to about 0.1% of the world's possible open resolvers led to 300 gigabits of denial of service attack traffic. This will not, there's been some people who have said that this is the largest denial of service attack in history. I don't know if that's true. It's the largest one we've seen. This will not, if it is the record holder, be the record holder for long, because you just have to increase any one of the numbers on that and you can make these attacks significantly larger. So this isn't a story of great technical masterminds that pulled off something that no one else had been talking about. We've known about the open resolver problem for a long time. This wasn't some clever new hack to how the underlying protocols work. This wasn't some packet fragmentation attack or some crazy thing. This was a stunningly simple equivalent of caveman has big club and is going to beat you over the head with it. And that's what is happening. And it's an incredibly effective attack, and there are very few networks on Earth that are able to stand up to it. And again, we're pretty proud of the fact that we did and that we continue to every day, and we continue to invest to make our network bigger. But here's a little bit about what we actually did in order to be able to resist the attack. So here's what we did to stop it. Some of which is applicable generally, some of which is kind of unique to us. So the first is we have the advantage of running a relatively large network scattered around the world. We've got 23 points of presence running at key exchange points all around the internet. We'll be up to about 50 by the end of this year. And that's Cloudflare's network today. And we do something which is really clever. We did it sort of out of expediency at first, but it's turned out to be very, very powerful for that, which is that we use a protocol called Anycast in order to transit traffic across that. There are a lot of DNS providers that use Anycast. We actually use it for HTTP traffic and other traffic as well, and it's a lot more stable than people give it credit for. If anyone wants to learn about it, let me know. It's a pain to set up, and it's a pain to coordinate your network to make it work, but because we've been able to do that, it has some real benefits in fighting attacks like this. If you're not familiar with the Anycast, typically on the internet, you have a source and a destination, and those are 2 points. Those each are represented by IP addresses. With Anycast, you have one source, and then you can have n number of destinations, and then the shortest path, simplified, is going to be the route that packets are going to take. And so in our case, if we have 23 data centers running around the world, each of those data centers can announce the exact same IP addresses, so they're all announcing that Spamhaus IP address. And when an attack gets launched, it inherently gets effectively diluted across all of the different data centers. So it's spread across all of the surface area of the attack which is out there. So in other words, if it's a 300 gig attack, we have 23 anycasted pops. That means we're dealing with 13 gigs per pop. And now we're in the realm of, I can kind of think about how to deal with that. I know what equipment to buy. I know how this works, and I can deal with that. The problem was that the attacker could do the math too. And very quickly, they realized that launching an attack directly at the edge of our network was a bit of a fool's errand, and that we're sort of like the reverse amplification effect. Everything they can do to make the attack bigger, we effectively can make it smaller if you attack the edge of our network. And so the other thing which was really interesting about this attack is they gave up attacking us directly, and they started walking up the chain attacking our providers. So they started attacking the upstreams that sit up and above Cloudflare's network. And the attack really focused around London. And for a while, I wasn't quite sure why the attack focused around London. I thought maybe, Spamhaus is based in London, so it was a way of embarrassing them. Turned out that the technical mastermind behind this, allegedly, is a kid living in London. And so a lot of it is for him to be able to test effectively whether his attack is taking things down. It was easier for him to do that. And so that was the sort of just shortest path for that to happen. So this is a trace route, which I've simplified and obscured to some extent from a broadband provider in London. That last hop on there is one of the Spamhaus IP addresses that we hand out across our network. We'll use many of them. And then you can see how this is getting routed. It's hard to tell from this, but it's actually getting routed to our facility in London. So you can see it's starting in London, and 17 milliseconds later, it's hitting the edge of our network running in London. So at first, the attacker attacked this address. And because they're using this distributed DNS, a little bit of it hit London, a little bit hit Amsterdam, a little bit hit Frankfurt, a little hit the United States, a little hit Asia, a little hit Australia, and it scattered the attack. And they realized that wasn't effective. And so what they did is they started walking up the trace route chain, going after additional pieces of the infrastructure. So they went after this IP address as well. This IP address, and again, if you don't know how sort of internet routing and interconnection works, some traffic gets exchanged directly between networks, where I will plug my network into another network. Some go across exchanges. In this particular case, the traffic which is coming to our network from Sky's network is passing across what's known as the London Internet Exchange, and the London Internet Exchange is known as Lynx, and so they started launching a ton of traffic against Lynx's port. We only have a relatively modest port at Lynx, so if you send 300 gigs of traffic to our Lynx port, you're going to overwhelm our Lynx port. You'll overwhelm other things within Lynx as well. So the solution for us was we just kept dropping the port. So anytime we'd see an attack against it, we'd drop the port, and then traffic would flow around it. The problem was that there was then collateral damage which affected some of the rest of Lynx. And so that was if we saw from other large web providers that were also sharing the Lynx infrastructure, that they would see drops in traffic to that. This is a pretty annoying thing for Lynx to have to deal with, and we've actually worked with them subsequently to help them actually protect their networks. This caused temporary regional disruptions for us, but we were pretty good at being able to shift traffic around to be able to keep Spamhaus and all of the rest of our customers online. They also went up after our upstream and transit providers, sending a whole bunch of traffic to the people that we contracted with. I think the goal here was to make us so much of a pain in the ass as a client that our upstreams would drop us. And so they were going after parts of upstream infrastructure that weren't even related to us. And some of those attacks may have reached even higher levels. I don't have the data for that, but they were attacking like core routers in various places in the upstreams, various upstreams networks. What we did was we worked with the IXs and the upstreams, and at some level what this served as was an incredible pen test, not only of our own network, but of our network writ large, because the edge of our network actually extends to all the providers that we use and all the providers that they use as well. And so what we did was we went through an audit of, well, what's actually vulnerable here? And we stepped through in a lot of places where certain exchanges, like the London Internet Exchange, weren't actually implementing best practices in terms of how to set up their network in order to make it as efficient as possible. Specifically, anything which is intra-network, right, inside the organization's network, you shouldn't be able to route to from the edge of their network. So if you want to hit one of the exchanges inside the exchange, that IP address shouldn't be routable across the exchange. Ideally, you should use a 192.168, one of the unroutable, the RFC 1918 addresses that can't be routed, and pass traffic across it. The best networks that are out there do that. There are other things that you can do as well. So if you turn on next top self-internal routing, making sure that when there is traffic that is destined internal to your network, that it can't be actually sent packets from outside of your network is really important. And do that yourselves, but then also audit your upstream providers to make sure they're doing that as well. We were forced to do that. There's, the other thing is edge filtering for particular IP addresses. We had, our application took different protocols. So UDP for us, if we see a UDP packet and it's not destined for a DNS server, then something is wrong. And so since we have segmented our network in such a way that IP addresses for the web servers are different than IP addresses for the DNS servers, we could ask our upstreams to say, just block all UDP traffic coming to this particular IP address, keeping that portion of our network safe. And so having that hygiene within our own IP space allowed us to do much more aggressive filtering with our upstreams. And then FlowSpec is our friend. FlowSpec has many, many flaws. It's a protocol that was proposed by Cisco. It's got lots of bugs, but we use it and we prefer transit providers that have it because it allows us to push rules up to their network that affect our routes, which means that we can very quickly respond to attacks like this. Particularly, I think a special shout out goes to the guys at NLayer. They did an amazing job at making sure that their network was extremely resilient to attack. While they saw peaks of this attack that were extremely high, they were quickly able to keep it from hitting even the edge of their network, which pushed it upstream. If you ever wanted to, if you ever thought, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to be a tier 1 provider? It'd be great to be, layer 3 or NTT or one of these tier 1s. I'll tell you that these are the weekends that it's not. Because while tier 1 providers don't buy transit from anyone, it also means they can't push transit to anyone. And so as all of us started to work to block our networks off, the attack got concentrated on a very few set of tier 1 providers that were at the center of that, and they had to black hole the traffic inside their networks because there was nowhere for that to go. And that's a real challenge for a lot of the tier 1s. It's also part of the reason why you saw something like the Open Resolver project get released the Monday after this. But NLayer was great. We worked with PACnet a lot as well. Telia has been terrific. But the NLayer guys are really technically savvy and were helpful at making sure that they understood how to get this up and didn't just say, hey, go away, you're causing us too much problems. So that's what we did. What are sort of the practical things that you can do to make sure your networks are secure? And I had sort of 4 suggestions. The first one is the lame but obvious one, which is make sure you're not part of the problem. Right. And lots of people have said this to you over the years. Just take a second to check to see that you've got the 2 ingredients not running on your network. So, the first one is, are you running open resolvers? Go to openresolver.org, put in your organization's IP space. If you see open resolvers that are running on your network, they are inherently flawed. There is something which is wrong with them. You need to either have some kind of rate limiting on those open resolvers, or you need to block them off, ACL them off so that they only are responding to requests that are actually coming from your network. This was my favorite Register article of the whole thing, which is from Trevor Pott, who said, gosh, I thought I was doing everything right, but turns out I was running an open resolver, and turns out I see through the traffic logs that a bunch of those requests were hitting Spamhaus. And so chances are a significant portion of you in this room who are responsible for very large networks are actually running open resolvers on your network, and you're contributing to the problem. So take a second and clean that up. The second is make sure that you implement BCP 38. This is something the eyeball network guys have done a good job at, but a lot of the people who are in this room that are running networks where you think, oh, it's closed, we don't allow external access. That's true, but you get one WordPress server which is compromised, you get some rogue machine running somewhere on your network, and if it can start spoofing source packets that aren't intended for your network, then it is causing a significant problem to the rest of the internet. And this the open resolver problem, 28 million open resolvers, and there are more each week, which is sad. This seems like a tractable problem. This seems like something that we can actually get our hands around and actually work together to resolve. This is a flag in your edge routers that makes sure that you're only sourcing packets that actually started within your network. And if you do this, then we deny the ability for attackers to really exploit it. If I had to guess why we haven't seen a lot more attacks that are getting up to this scale, and we see some, but very few that have gotten up to this large scale, at least hitting our network. I think the real reason is it's still kind of hard to find large compromised machines that are running on networks that allow this spoofing. But if you look at like the attacks that have been going on against WordPress, the brute force attacks that are there, some of these other attacks that seem like they're building a botnet but it's not quite clear what it is, that's one of the reasons that my guess is that that's happening. So the second is, practice really good protocol hygiene. It's very simple to say, hey, I've got this IP address and I'm running a service that needs to speak UDP and I'm running a service that needs to speak TCP and I'm running another service that needs to speak ICMP and I'm going to put them all behind that same IP. I would caution you that when problems strike, that's going to limit your flexibility and your ability to deal with these types of attacks. So the more that you can actually segment your network in such a way that individual protocols run across their own IP addresses, the better you're going to be able to do filtering, especially upstream filtering. And the goal in any of these attacks is to not stop it inside your network, it's to stop it as close to the source as possible. And by giving someone the ability to say, block all UDP traffic headed to every IP except this one, you significantly decrease the surface area that the attacker can actually go after. So separate protocols onto distinct IPs and then work, and in some cases work proactively with your upstream providers to say, hey, can you implement these types of filters? Again, one of the reasons that we like providers that support FlowSpec is that we can then say, hey, do you support FlowSpec? And they say yes, and then the conversation's done. We can push our own filters up to the edge as quickly as we want. Third, implement infrastructure ACLs. And so what I mean by that is it shouldn't be possible that a packet can be destined for your internal network unless it was also itself sourced from your internal network. So if a packet is egressing or ingressing in from your edge, then don't let it to actually transit to your internal infrastructure which is out there. And there are a number of ways that you can do this. You can do filtering to allow certain IPs to not be able to ingress from the edge. You can do next hop self-routing to allow it to say that internally these things are unaddressable. You can internally use RFC 1918 protocols inside of your network to make sure that that's not addressable from the outside world. And this does cause headaches. It means it's a little bit harder for somebody to necessarily get in and check the health of a router. You have to actually use your VPN as opposed to just pretending to use your VPN, right? Seriously, right? And so these are sometimes not the most popular decisions, but again, when an attack comes, the more that they can look into your network and target individual parts of your network, the more that they're able to do the real harm to what's there. And then the fourth is really know your upstreams. Again, I want to emphasize there's nothing about this attack that we see crazy, sophisticated application level attacks. We see crazy SYN flood attacks. This is just a volume attack. This is a caveman with a club. And so at some level, you have to have more transit than the bad guy does. And the bad guy can generate 300 gigs of traffic, and there are very few organizations in this room that have 300 gigs of spare traffic sitting around, right? And so that means you have to have a friend that's got a lot of traffic, and the best friend you can possibly have is your upstream. And so picking your upstreams in such a way that it's not necessarily, I'm just going to chase the lowest dollar per meg that I can possibly get, but I'm going to chase whoever is going to have my back when an attack like this actually comes in is really important. Well, that's what we've done. We've been very selective of really screening the upstreams that we work with to make sure that when attacks come in, they can do this. I'm sitting with the CTO of a major transit provider, the other day, and he had sort of just stopped by our office, and I said, you know, are you here to sell me transit? And he said, no, you guys would be way too much of a pain in the ass as a customer. Which is fair, right? We are. But that's what we look for, and we certainly pay a premium for the transit providers that we use, because when these sorts of attacks come in, you want to be able to call them up and you want them to be able to help you mitigate that, right? You don't want to have to build in 3, 4, 5 terabits of capacity. You don't have to do what we're doing, right? It's not realistic that everyone's going to build their own anycasted network, but you do want to at least have partners that you can talk to and call. And they're not necessarily DDoS prevention companies. It can be just the nlayers of the world, or the PACnets of the world, or the Telias of the world that do a really good job at being technically sophisticated and helping you when these sorts of problems come on. So, you know, work with them closely, and effectively what you're doing then is you're extending the edge of their network. You're allowing policies for your network to get set up at the edge of their network, and network providers are willing to do that if you ask them and you have the right network providers. So that's the story of the 300 gigabit denial of service attack. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, and so happy to take any that any people have. Yeah.
Hi. I've been doing a fair bit of study of compromised servers, compromised web hosting accounts, and there is at least one spammer I've been tracking, which was a network of 50,000 of them. So there are a lot of them out there.
Yes.
And I've looked at some of the shells and control panels that spammers have put on these accounts, and some of them have DDoS buttons. Talk later, I want to.
Sure. Okay. Other questions? Yes, there's a microphone, right? If people want to queue at the microphones, there are microphones there. One last thing I forgot. The new thing at Black Hat is they want speaker feedback. If you scan your badge outside, they'll turn your information over to the NSA, and then they'll also get feedback on. I think I'm kidding about the first. They'll also give you feedback on this. So go on and tell me I'm an idiot or do whatever. It'd be awesome.
So as Cloudflare, what other protocols have you seen that are being used for amplification besides UDP 53?
Yeah, so the question was, are we seeing other protocols that are being used for amplification? We still see the odd ICMP, good old Smurf attack. But nothing gets up to this scale of attacks. The new wave of amplification attacks, the talk next year is don't use open resolvers, use legitimate authoritative DNS servers. So use Cloudflare or Bind or Ultra DNS or whatever to launch this. And if you can enumerate all of the domains for which an authoritative name server is responsible, and you can find some of those domains that have very large records, you can do that. And so it's incumbent on anyone that's running an authoritative DNS provider service to have rate limiting in place to be able to protect that. We've just taken a bunch of time to implement that, and anyone who's curious, I'm happy to tell you how we did it.
During this example, botnets were not used, but I'm curious for the audience purposes, what resources you might recommend to be able to detect whether or not a large network that you manage actually has botnet participants utilizing a DDoS attack on someone.
Yeah, I mean, so you can look for, so it depends on where you are. So you can either look at organizations that track botnet behavior and see whether you're showing up in it. So an open source project I started a number of years ago is called Project Honeypot. We effectively track a significant portion of the world's botnets. You can go in, put your IP address ranges in, and it will tell you whether there are things doing bad things somewhere on your network. That's sort of looking at the effects and seeing how it's done, and that's just one of many similar projects that do similar things. The Team Cymru guys have done an incredibly good job at tracking this, and again, their website and those guys are a great resource for anything which is out there. The other thing is just to look for anomalous traffic patterns that are coming across your networks. If you're seeing a gig of traffic being sent to one IP address, there's almost no legitimate reason why you should have a gig of traffic egressing your network for a sustained period of time that's not coming from something like a web server. So if you see that, then it's something that should be suspicious.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Google has one of the most popular open DNS resolvers. Do you see problems with that, or do they have enforcement in place to?
So the question is, Google has a popular open DNS resolver. They've done a great job of doing rate limiting on this. The best way to test that is take that same dig query that I gave you and replace, instead of the IP address that was the PCCW address that was in there, replace it with 8.8.8.8 and run the query. You'll run it once. Someone in this room will run it once. It'll work. And then it won't work for anyone else in the room. And so they've been very good at limiting the queries that are there, and that's why running Google's open, that's the hard part of running something like Google DNS or Open DNS, is making sure that it's not used for abuse. There's some other smart things that you can do. You can ignore the require UDP flag, which solves a lot of the problems. You can limit the size of the responses you get back. That then limits the scale of the amplification. There are a lot of amplification methods that are like a 2x. What's unique about this one is it's a 50x. So, yeah.
Hi there. Have you seen any adoption at transit providers of BGP flow spec? You guys make extensive use of BGP flow spec, and it feels like if we have a network that has not the capacity of absorbing that much traffic, if they're actually like pushing on BGP flow spec being something that's enabled for clients.
So the challenge, if I were to pick on one organization about BGP flow spec, if you see anyone's badge that says Cisco here, yell at them, right? They invented the protocol and then never implemented it. We've made enough noise that they've at least told us that it's on the roadmap. It should be accelerated on the roadmap. Unfortunately, when you have heterogeneous networks that have Cisco and Juniper support, then you're not necessarily going to be able to get flow spec support across their entire network, and we deal with that from time to time. But we definitely, any transit providers in the world that want to sell to us, we currently strongly prefer Juniper-based networks because we can speak flow spec to them. I'm hopeful that Cisco will start supporting flow spec in the next 12 months.
Can you also talk a little bit about your flow spec experience at Cloudflare? I know that you guys had like an outage because of the packet size, whatever, but overall the experience, is it something that we should be thinking of doing ourselves?
It's super buggy. And you end up between a rock and a hard place with it, because you want to run what is the stable version of your router software, but stable version of your router software has all kinds of bugs within flow spec. So we have a whole middle layer that essentially has kind of found as many of those bugs as we have and tries to correct around them. If people are interested in it, I'm not the best person to talk to, but I'd be happy to put you in touch with some of the network guys on our team who can speak specifically to the experience of running it. But it is very handy to be able to push network rules up to your upstream providers.
Cool. I'll be in touch with other questions. Thank you.
I use Cloudflare myself, love the service, and I follow the blog, and I see that you guys are working on your next generation of hardware, the network's getting larger, that sort of thing. Do you find that a fear of like an arms race in terms of your capacity versus your attacker's capacity, and when do you say, oh, okay, we just can't do this anymore? Or do you?
So I think we're in a pretty good position in that arms race, because we can turn up more capacity pretty quickly. I think the thing that's the somewhat insidious, and this was not by design, but the somewhat insidious piece is that the attacks are now large enough that there just aren't that many networks that can deal with this, and so the device-based DDoS mitigation has a role and a place, and I wouldn't tell you to pull it out, but it's, for an attack like this, it just, you don't have a 300 gig port on your Arbor Networks box, and so that's a challenge. And so that's pushing people to, companies like Akamai, which are doing, have a huge network and can be able to mitigate this. Companies like us, and we're building out what we think of as edge network services. I mean, the way that we see the world is there's a whole bunch of stuff that you used to have to buy a box for that does, performance and security and load balancing and all of those sorts of things. We think of ourselves as building an edge platform that can slot any of those applications into it and then have infinite scalability, infinite reliability, infinite availability. Is there an arms race? Maybe, but I mean, and again, this is somewhat sick, but it probably helps us more than hurts us. And you know, I think that the challenges of running a network are getting large enough that you're going to see a consolidation of the edge around a relatively limited number of providers. And my hunch of who those providers are, Akamai will be one, Amazon will be another, I'm hopeful we'll be a third. Eventually Google comes into this business kicking and screaming. And then, you know, the question is who else has the network to be able to do it?
So I really appreciate you bringing attention to open resolvers and BCP 38. You kind of glossed over the fact that DNSSEC is really the problem here. And
there's a reason we haven't implemented it.
Right. So what I was going to ask is, do you have any interest in using your sort of marketplace power and your relationships to either fix DNSSEC before it gets widespread adoption, or support some of the alternatives, so that, as you said, next year the talk isn't how are all of these authoritatives that have deployed DNSSEC now attacking my infrastructure?
I've read the Constitution. I don't know. That's such a hard question. I mean, the DNSSEC is solving a problem. From my seat, does it seem like it's solving a bigger problem than this problem? No. Is there a better way of doing it? It's above my pay grade. It's a real challenge. I think that we need to, so we went through the effort of, and this sounds insane, but we don't run bind, we don't run power DNS. We went through the effort of writing our own DNS server because we were unhappy with how everything else scaled under load, handled attacks, and was able to do different things. And we've got a little toggle, a switch that we flip and we turn DNSSEC on. And we just want to make sure we're not making the world a worse place. So I am very open to what the right answer to that question is, but I am scared that if we get a big if we get a big push for DNSSEC and we haven't done the things to limit the harm that DNS servers can cause, that it's a challenge. That said, you can do this amplification without DNSSEC. You can put in a whole bunch of text records. You can do a whole bunch of other things. But it's certainly a lot easier to find these big records with that. One of the things we're starting to see, though, is people will sign up for Cloudflare and they'll create these giant DNS zone records, and then they'll use us as an amplifier. And we've gotten pretty good at detecting that. But it's, again, the creativity of attackers never ceases to amaze me.
Do you need to pay
Last question,
for the attack traffic to your upstream provider?
Do we need to pay for it?
And I have a following question to that.
Oh, so we don't charge our customers. So Spamhaus paid $200 a month.
No, do you need to pay your upstream provider for the attack traffic?
Yes, we pay for the traffic if it gets above that. Now that said, the way that transit is billed is the greater of in versus out, and there are very few attacks where in exceeds out for us because we're a caching proxy. And so from a bandwidth perspective, one of the beauties of Cloudflare's business is the fact that typically attacks for us are effectively free, at least from a bandwidth perspective. And so that's, again, this is an exception that this cost us something. But, you know, I mean, it was the right thing to do. We want to make sure that if you're under a denial, like when people are under denial of service attacks and they call us, you know, we try to be the opposite of what a lot of traditional DDoS vendors are. We're like, turn it on, solve the attacks, we'll talk about pricing tomorrow.
My follow-up question is that would it be possible to DDoS you under X amount of time, so you don't have, so you need to pay so much money for your attacking traffic? Then you must say no to your customers that we can't handle this because it costs us too much.
You underestimate how much money we have in the bank.
Thank you.
So, thank you. I'm happy to talk to other folks afterwards, but I think we have to get the next speaker on.